the rim. Garnett on the slam. Oh, using Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry.
Our Pacer story begins in a somewhat familiar place for both you and Reggie Miller, The Last Dance. Upon building a core as tough as nails, complete with the addition of Chris Mullin on the wing opposite Miller, Indy had been in as good a position as ever to knock off Mike once and for all. Yet, if you ever want to understand the pain of coming just short over and over again, study Miller's career, and possibly the Pacers franchise. By 98, Miller was a battle-tested veteran. He'd been through the infamous 94 and 95 heartbreaks, including a 25-point fourth quarter against New York and the near upset of Orlando. But 98? This was the one. This Pacers team might have been the best balanced roster he'd ever played on, and on the heels of surviving situations many had already died in, they pushed Chicago to 7 games in the Eastern Conference Finals. For reference, since the Bulls' first title, it was only the second time they'd been pushed to the brink, here in their last dance with everyone knowing they were older, tired, and very much on the ropes. They had Game 7 right there, even leading in the fourth quarter of a Game 7 against the Dynasty, which was a supremely unique experience. Yet, as we've already established, close, just not enough. The Bulls' ability to remain unrattled, mixed with Indy's untimely shooting droughts, cost them a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Think of the Pacer franchise we've known over the decades, and imagine the timeline where they essentially retired Jordan after his decade of dominance. No cigar. Jordan proceeded to grab his 6th, while Indiana's left wondering if they'll ever see a finals under Miller. This had been their 3rd time over the era losing a 7th game to the conference champion. 2 of those Game 7s were losses within 5 points. From Reggie recalling the series, they were considered the best at the time, but I feel to this day, we were the better team. The whole thing is, there was whispers that this was going to be Mike's last year. So I think a perfect storm was brewing, and in my mind, I was thinking, alright, this is it. You're gonna retire Michael Jordan. Jordan called them the toughest team he'd faced outside of Detroit, and Steve Kerr recalled it as the scariest game they'd ever faced. If you're ever wondering just how close, yeah, that close. Though the important distinction is that this was supposedly the end. The Bulls were no more. So in a way, similar to how 2026 feels very open with Boston completely dismantled, there was an automatic power vacuum on the horizon, and who better to think as the favorites than the group who'd already been on the doorstep. In accordance, during the lockout year, Indy was obviously favored by many to finally break through, only to become yet another victim to the 8th-seeded Knicks. If you recall the Heat doc from last year, New York had been something of a false 8th seed in the first place, given they'd stumbled into the postseason with the brutally rushed schedule. Here's the catch. The Patrick Ewing, who averaged 14 and 10 in the Miami upset, only played 2 games against Indy before partially tearing his Achilles. They still went on to lose in 7. Looking back at it, it's fun to track how different the culture of the league has become. Here was Reggie, now around 34 years old and having been to 4 conference finals over the span of a decade. Whereas in today's league, he'd have probably left or been traded far before it ever got to that point. Nope. As you can tell by his position in today's run, they had a lifer. Plus, once again, they weren't that far away. Hilariously, the dominance of Chicago was being replaced behind the scenes by something even nastier. For years now, while the Pacers had failed to even scale the Eastern Conference mountain, Los Angeles had been slowly accruing the assets of their next dynasty. First, it was the Shaq deal, in a move taking away the centerpiece of Indy's killers in 1995. Then, as Jerry West put it, he drafted the kid that was going to win multiple championships alongside him. Unfortunately, 2000 was going to be the first. It was also Reggie's first finals appearance. All the battles, the grueling disappointments, the iconic moments. Again, he was now 34 years old. The window was narrowing, and the road itself again wasn't easy. They got past the Sixers and the rising talent of Allen Iverson, finally conquered New York in the East Finals, which had to have felt good given the 90s. Now in the finals, they were thrown against the evolved versions of Shaq and Kobe, specifically Shaq at the height of his powers. Looking back at the footage, it could appear this was just another Eastern cakewalk team, but they truly were just outmatched. MVP Shaq averaged nearly 40. The Pacers did everything they could, including purposely injuring Kobe in an attempt to just go ahead and steal one. Sometime later, Jalen Rose surprisingly admitted as much. Kobe Bean Bryant goes up for a jump shot out on the right wing. I contest the jump shot. Kobe lands on my foot. He hobbles off and actually misses the next game. If it was up to me, he should have just missed the whole series. I would have had a championship ring and it would have been no harm, no foul. I think I did it on purpose. I can't say it was an accident. Well, karma came around as it usually does, and when Shaq fouled out of the crucial Game 4, Bean was there to clean up the mess in spectacular fashion, marking his first iconic finals moment of many. Falling into the unsalvageable 3-1 ditch, the next dynasty had already begun in LA, on the backs of the unit previously unable to scale the old dynasty. How cruel. For the next few years, nobody could do much about it. After that year, everything started to shift. In the coming seasons, Jalen Rose was traded, Rick Smits retired, Mullen was out, Mark Jackson moved on, and somehow through it all, an aging Reggie Miller became the last man standing from that 98 core who had nearly altered history. And the league was getting younger and more athletic quickly. Still, this is the culture change discussed earlier. Rather than immediately fading out or blowing things up after so many failures, the Pacers retooled. They drafted Al Harrington, commenced a huge 2002 trade with Chicago, which included Ron Artest, and most importantly, traded for Jermaine O'Neal for a relatively small price. Reg transitioned from the driving force to leader. Jermaine became the go-to guy, taking the mantle as the team's leading scorer by 03, while having accumulated a Most Improved award with 2 All-Star and All-NBA appearances. Miraculously, by 2004, the Pacers were all the way back, winning a still franchise-best 61 games. How many teams in history have fallen short for decades and bounced back with the face of their franchise to organically build another contender? This was a menacing group built on defense, physicality, and a very clear hierarchy. O'Neal in his prime was better than history remembers. Ron Artest was arguably the best defender in basketball and now had the Defensive Player of the Year to prove it. Reggie was older but still dangerous from the arc, serving the best record in the NBA, and only one of 2 50-plus win teams in the East. They crushed Boston, beat the young Heat, although it was certainly a challenge from rookie D. Wade, then as expected ran into the revitalized Detroit Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals. It was always going to be a neck-and-neck series. A gritty, low-scoring, defensive slugfest between the 2 best defensive teams was the expectations, and exactly what was delivered. In a fun little footnote given today's context, first-year Pacer head coach Rick Carlisle was coaching against his former team in Detroit for a chance to go to the NBA Finals. ESPN described it as a grudge match of sorts. A grudge match it was. In a series where the team who scored over 80 points first or got the closest to it was deemed to automatically win, the Detroit Pistons egged it out in 6. Another year, another round of Reggie losing to either the champion or the conference champion. This time, it was both. As usual, however, now was no time to mourn. And I mean, why mourn anyway? Sure, Reggie was quickly running out of realistic chances, but they continued to be just shy of finishing the job. Meanwhile, the core around him was young, and the Pistons did the solid of officially dismantling the Laker dynasty. The West wasn't short of juggernauts, yet it had to be relieving to know Shaq and Kobe were no longer waiting at the finish line. So they doubled down. 2005 was, once again, supposed to be the year. The otherwise successful group all returned. At least they were now battle-tested. Jermaine was an MVP candidate, Artest was locked in, perhaps a little too locked in actually. Then for the small price of a trade exception and a future draft pick, an already contending core added Steven Jackson, an electric forward who could add the missing scoring punch to scale Detroit. As for Reggie, well, he was now at his last dance, or whatever you'd call it, 39 years old, reeling off so many tries. No one would know till around February, but this was in fact the final attempt. Then came November 19th, 2004. A moment so chaotic, so destructive that it didn't just derail a season. It ended a brand new core before it even got close to its potential, and quite honestly shaped the next decade of Pacer basketball. After Ben Wallace and Artest got into it under the basket, NBA history's most infamous brawl ever commenced. Fights, tackling, throwing, all you could imagine. This beautiful professional game temporarily turned into a gladiator match. In a situation that could have gotten even more out of hand if you could imagine. The irony of it coming at the hands of Detroit can't be overlooked either. Tensions were already high, and these were still 2 of the best teams in the East despite Miami having acquired Shaq. Indeed definitely got the short end of the stick. Artest, suspended for the season. Steven Jackson and Jermaine O'Neal both got hit with enough games to essentially ruin the season. Reggie, the elder statesman who left it all on the court over nearly 20 years trying to elevate Indy to basketball supremacy, was now left standing, watching everything fall apart. Just months before that night, the Pacers were the favorites to come out of the East. By the end of that game, it was difficult to see what would become of such a young core even a year into the future. Reggie finally hung up his sneakers that spring when they lost to none other than Detroit in the second round. No farewell tour, no Eastern Conference swan song. Truth be told, 98 to 05 has got to be one of the saddest endings to a legendary career. Over the period, he led 2 very different Pacer cores and trusted the franchise who forged him, walking away with nothing but respect. His loyalty to Indiana never wavered, and in a way, that loyalty became the blueprint for what the franchise would become. Respected, tough, persistent, but never quite crowned.
Those last few years in Indiana, my best years. I didn't have my superpowers, but I felt, and you guys made me feel like I was Superman. We had some dogs, man. We had a squad. That was arguably, and I played on some Indiana teams that were destined, should have, could have, but always came short. That team, we were stacked, man. We had the best interior defender in Jermaine. We had the best perimeter defender, in my opinion, to this day, in Ron. Just acquired you coming, having been a champion, with these young guys. We had just lost to Detroit the year before without you, and we smacked them there. But you don't need to apologize because that's basketball, that's life.
With Reggie now in the wind and the Malice fallout still fresh, Indiana entered summer 2005 in a strange purgatory. On paper, they technically still had a title contending core. O'Neal in his prime working towards a 5th All-Star appearance, Artest returning from suspension, and still their relatively new weapon in Steven Jackson. Yet, something had changed. The harmony of the 2004 juggernaut was long gone as, well, how could it not be? The 2006 season was simply coming to finish the job. Ron Artest played just 16 games before infamously requesting a trade, citing how he wanted to be the main man elsewhere. I think I've outgrown my role. I need a fresh start. I still love Indiana, but I think it's time for me to move on. It was a pretty direct ode to how he felt the offense should be geared toward him instead of O'Neal, who felt disrespected by the public reasoning. The stunt fractured whatever hope remained of the core bouncing back. Indy ultimately suspended him before finally sending him to Sacramento in January 2006, in exchange for Peja Stojakovic, a temporary spark who would leave in free agency months later. The Artest chapter was closed, but the hole left in the team's chemistry and defense lingered. Adding insult, Ron went on to become pretty successful as his early potential hinted at. He also proved he could produce in bigger roles as he thought. Through it all, Jermaine continued posting strong numbers. Still an all-star, but his injuries began piling up too. And while Steven Jackson and Jamal Tinsley provided production, they also became symbols of the locker room turmoil that hovered over the franchise. Another forgotten turning point came in the 2006 preseason, when several players, including Jackson, were involved in a nightclub shooting incident. Though no one was seriously hurt, the incident deepened the public perception that Indiana had completely lost its identity. Also, Jackson received another suspension for his role in the incident. Now, in incidents touching 3 separate seasons, the vibes around the organization were completely shot. No pun intended. Let's rewind just a small bit. Enter Danny Granger. Drafted 17th overall in 2005, he was the temporary antidote to the chaos. Quiet, humble, professional, everything a now chaotic franchise needed during those turbulent years. And most importantly, of course, Granger could hoop. By 2007, he was the face of the team, and by 2009, he exploded for 26 points per game, earning Most Improved Player and his first and only All-Star nod. This is telling. The problem? Per usual, injuries. Granger's knees began to betray him right when it looked like he was ready to lead a new era. For 2009 and 10, he'd established a pattern of missing games, and though he'd shown promising potential, repetitive feet and knee injuries gave reason for pause. Meanwhile, the rest of the roster wasn't faring much better, so they weren't necessarily missing out on potential runs anyway. The Pacers missed the playoffs 4 straight years from 2006 to 2010. Larry Bird, now fully running the front office, began quietly laying the foundation for the next chapter. In 2008, he traded for Roy Hibbert's draft rights, sending the once cornerstone in Jermaine O'Neal to Toronto, and clearing space for the next big swings all in one swoop. Already, they had the makings of the next era of Indiana basketball. With Danny Granger's knees deteriorating and 4 straight years of obscurity, Indiana needed a spark, and fast. Remember, through the whole Miller era, and especially toward the end, this had been an extremely relevant franchise. I grew up with 2000s basketball, where I knew them as the Malice team who were now just infinitely in the depths. Up to this point, you can see that was mostly a product of sudden derailment. We're talking about a franchise who'd managed to give one star multiple cores to contend with. It wasn't like them to just exist, even if it felt that way to me as a young fan who only knew this version. Enter Paul George. In the 2010 NBA draft, they selected a lanky, relatively unknown forward out of Fresno State with the 10th overall pick. At the time, it wasn't exactly a celebrated selection. George was raw, and most expected him to be a long-term project. Few, if anyone, foresaw that the next franchise cornerstone had just walked through the door, especially when their current forward wasn't officially cooked yet. In the same draft, quiet yet effectively, they'd also managed to draft Lance Stevenson at 40. Without even knowing it, they'd already redone their perimeter rotation for the future. The seeds of a new identity had been planted. That same summer, Larry Bird acquired Darren Collison to stabilize the point guard spot. Roy Hibbert was developing steadily as a rim protector, and head coach Frank Vogel, promoted midway through the 2011 season, began shifting the culture into one focused on defense, toughness, and ball movement. Traits that would soon mirror their most iconic teams of the past. They'd found the formula. After 4 seasons in the shadows, Indiana broke back into the playoffs. Granger was still leading the charge, while Paul George had quickly proven himself to be more than a project. His length and instincts made him a defensive pest from day one. Perhaps he'd one day match Granger as part of a contending unit? With little expectations, they managed a win off the East-leading Chicago Bulls, which was good enough for now. But it was in 2012 where you could see the official turning point. George was now a full-time starter, and while Granger played nearly all of the Lockout Rush campaign, he was at the end of his arc as we knew it. The two managed a very successful season by recent standards, avoiding the pitfall of a faster schedule to the tune of 42 of 66 games, nabbing the 3rd seed right behind the Miami Heat. While they weren't yet seen as a legitimate threat, the roster was back up and running as a respectable core, more accustomed to what the fan base had been used to. Roy Hibbert made one of 2 career All-Star appearances. Next to him, David West had been a key signing in December, a very solid big who'd already achieved multiple All-Star nods in New Orleans. The point guard rotation was fresh as well. Collison, as mentioned earlier, now with the steady hand of George Hill. Except how they got that steady hand was less than satisfactory. On draft night 2011, Larry Bird sent Kawhi Leonard, picked at 15, immediately to San Antonio for Hill. Kawhi Leonard. This is one of those things where the timing was just poor. Granger's official tendonitis diagnosis wouldn't come down until November 2012. To the trained eye, it appeared he and PG could do something special, and they definitely needed a point guard more than another young forward. Still, the next events quickly spawned what-ifs of how things might have gone if the two practically began their careers together. I mean, we saw how it went years later when it was too late. Either way, in the present, they caught a break drawing the injured Orlando Magic in round 1. Orlando without Dwight was not Magic. The advance pit them against defending conference champs in Miami, but should have been a quick and painless series. That was until Bosh experienced pain, which was an abdominal injury. Suddenly, a roster built for 3 superstar talents was now Wade, James, and friends, with a huge drop-off from Bosh to the next big. With another break, Indy found themselves up 2-1, and were briefly in control before LeBron and Wade flipped the series with one of their all-time performances in Game 4. If you'll recall, they'd actually come within a hair of 3-1, trailing by only 3 in the 4th quarter of a very tight affair. Of course, it was just way too good to be true for a franchise who was no stranger by now to coming just up to the doorstep. Miami prevailed and never looked back. How encouraging was that though? A roster who was projected below 500 coming into the year watched their sophomore hold his own against basketball royalty and contribute to playoff wins. It could only possibly go up from here in a normal world. Okay, now the official end for Granger. The tendonitis issue claimed almost all of the 2013 season. It opened the door for Paul George to start his pathway toward becoming a full-fledged star. He made his first All-Star team, multiple All-NBA teams, Most Improved, and led Indiana to 49 wins, upping his scoring average to 17 points a game. The defensive identity of the team was nearly complete, making it the perfect time for a star to step into Granger's vacant spot. Still, LeBron had just won his first title, and no East teams were considered particularly close to the Heat with Chicago out of the picture. Entering the postseason as a 4th seed who weren't really the center of any kind of attention, they quietly dispatched of the Hawks for round 1. Round 2 was far more daunting, however. Pacers and Knicks, a story as old as time itself. New York won 54 games, dishing out one of their strongest rosters in franchise history. Even so, most predictions had the Knicks in 6. Which most of the times is another way of saying it'll be challenging. It was slightly more than challenging.
I wonder if he was coming in for JR. Anthony attacks. Hibbert denies him at the rim. Block number 5 for the Pacers center.
The block that set a franchise back nearly a decade. Yeah, actually, they only made one postseason in the next 10 years afterwards. As for Indy, well, now you had to start believing just a bit. The way it was kind of just assumed the conference finals would boil down to Melo and Braun finally. It was quite literally blocked as it was coming to fruition. Heat Pacers Part 2 would commence. Unlike a year prior, when the Pacers were just happy to be there, this time there was a war. Game 1 was the warning shot, as Miami just barely escaped with the dub. George guarded LeBron on one end and was clearly making a name for himself on the other.
Here comes George, got the step and stuffs one move and counts on the foul. He beat LeBron James with that quick step. A sensational move by Paul George.
It was his breakout moment, the Thunderous poster, which never quite stopped making rounds on the internet. Not only was Hibbert anchoring one of the league's best defenses, the Heat were woefully unprepared to deal with a legit 7-footer. His averages jumping from roughly 11-8 to 22-10. Lance Stevenson emerged as a chaotic wild card, pestering LeBron in clips which also never stopped resurfacing, though the most famous or infamous one wouldn't happen for another year. David West brought veteran muscle, all while PG was rapidly becoming one of the best two-way players in the league. A future face of the East even, should LeBron ever stumble, especially with Rose's Bulls out of the picture. But he wouldn't stumble this year. Miami handedly took Game 7, and the Pacers, per usual, walked away with pride, but also frustration. They were close, again, with nothing to show for it but encouragement to run it back. In 2014, Indiana started the season on fire. They raced to a 33-7 record, looked like the best team in the league for stretches, and again finished near the top of the East. You can still even find the interaction between Roy Hibbert and LaMarcus Aldridge predicting a finals matchup after a tough competition. George made another All-Star team. Hibbert was in the running for Defensive Player of the Year. The defense was once again elite, and now the #1 seed was theirs. I can vividly remember the NBA doing everything it could to brand them as the challengers to the throne. As for the Heatles, they were now repeat champs, knocking down the door of the first three-peat since the Lakers dynasty. Indy knew they were close, but cracks started forming at crucial moments. To start, Hibbert's offensive game had plateaued. Lance Stephenson's erratic playstyle and off-court antics became a growing distraction. Rumors swirled of locker room tension. There were whispers that Hibbert and George had fallen out, though the reasons were never publicly confirmed. Some said it had to do with off-court drama, others simply chalked it up to chemistry. Whatever it was, the vibe was clearly off. Adding to the problem, a midseason trade played a huge part in taking the vibes. They entered the All-Star break with the best record in the NBA, later showing how this ended up shifting everything. Indiana made the cold but calculated decision to send longtime Pacer and former potential cornerstone Danny Granger to Philadelphia in exchange for Evan Turner and Lavoy Allen. The logic? Granger, who had only just returned from injuries, didn't quite fit anymore. And Turner, a former #2 overall pick, potentially bolstered scoring and versatility off the bench. Whatever they gained in talent though, they lost in chemistry. Turner's style never quite meshed. A ball-dominant wing on a team built around defensive grit and ball movement. His arrival threw off the locker room vibe almost immediately. Roy Hibbert, already in a midseason slump, made cryptic comments about, quote, selfish dude, which many took as a jab at Turner. Behind closed doors, things got worse. Later in the playoffs, Turner reportedly got into a near-physical altercation with Lance Stevenson during practice. Tensions were that high. It was a far cry from the unified team that had built itself brick by brick over the last few years. Even on the floor, the magic had vanished. After the blistering 33-7 start, they stumbled through the final stretch, basically finishing 500 through the last 30 games and looking more like a team searching for answers than a title favorite. The chemistry was off, the trust was eroding, and the Miami Heat smelled blood in the water that basically nullified the home court advantage Indy earned. Adding to the concern, early in the postseason, they had to survive a 7-game slog against Atlanta. On paper, this should not have been a challenge. Indiana had far more advantages, including the talent. The Hawks? They finished the season 38-44, a sub-500 team, and had limped into the playoffs as the 8th seed. For reference, this record would have made them a bottom-feeding West team. It looked like a routine warm-up. It was a dogfight, and it exposed all of Indy's internal dysfunction early on. The Hawks were even without Al Horford, and so leaned into a 5-out floor spacing attack with Paul Millsap, Kyle Korver, and Jeff Teague. This gave Roy Hibbert fits. Atlanta dragged him out of the paint and neutralized what had once been Indy's biggest defensive weapon. His confidence cratered. He recorded 0 points, 0 rebounds, and 4 turnovers in Game 5. A stat line that felt like a funeral for his dominant defensive run the prior 2 years. Gilbert Arenas was sure to amplify it to the world. Yet it wasn't just him, although he was the biggest story. From top to bottom, the roster looked shaken. Lance Stevenson and Turner reportedly had their scrum and shoot around. Paul George, still not quite the takeover player he'd later become, struggled with consistency as he no longer had the element of surprise. The Pacers managed to squeak through, but the damage was clear. The #1 seed nearly got bounced in the first round by a team with a terrible record. They were a 1 seed in name only at this point. After 6 games with Washington, there remained one final test. This time, it wasn't even close. Miami knocked them out in 6 games, winning 3 of the 4 matches by double digits. Although they'd only known contention for 2 seasons and nobody had a clue yet, that was indeed the end of their title window. Lance Stevenson bolted in free agency, Hibbert's game fell off a cliff, David West was aging, and then came August 1st, 2014, a date that changed everything and significantly altered Eastern Conference history.
Thomas and Mack Center here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Mark Jones alongside Fran Fraschilla with 9:33 to go in the fourth quarter. And multiple looks of concern etched across the numerous faces of the USA basketball players, coaches, and training staff. As moments ago, Paul George, we're not going to show it to you again, folks. It was, quite frankly, it was almost gruesome.
The 2015 campaign was over before it even began. After a short rebuild process and some massive leaps forward in a relatively short time, PG became victim of one of the worst injuries in NBA history. What were they to do now? He wasn't even in his prime yet. He'd replaced another wing star who wasn't panning out. The core had been, yet again, on the doorstep, and now overnight, no longer contenders. That year, they were obviously forced back out of the playoffs. George returned briefly at the end of the season, almost as if to prove a point. Regardless, the team was a shell of itself. The once promising era built on the ashes of the Malice had crumbled in a matter of months. Though George made a strong individual comeback, even finishing third in MVP voting in 2016 and returning to All-NBA form, the Pacers never recaptured the same magic. Vogel was let go in 2016, Nate McMillan took over. The team was retooled around with moderate pieces like Jeff Teague, Miles Turner, and Thaddeus Young. Good, but never great. So by 2017, the writing was on the wall. With free agency looming a year out, George informed the Pacers of the obvious. He had no plans to re-sign. He was eyeing Los Angeles. Indy, burned by past exits, acted swiftly, trading him to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. A move that would unexpectedly keep them relevant. So unexpected, in fact, I'll never forget covering it in real time, marveling at the lack of assets it took to acquire him. The PG era had come to a crashing end. 7 seasons, 2 conference finals appearances, a fully realized star who gave them hope and, per usual, brought them only to the doorstep. After his exit in 2017, Indy was left grasping for answers. Fans braced for a harsh rebuilding phase, and when the trade went down, expectations weren't exactly sky high, for good reason. Yet, basketball is often unpredictable, and they were about to find out firsthand. Almost immediately, Vic exploded onto the scene. The athletic guard, previously known as one of the many solid players in Orlando years ago who hadn't quite found his footing in the NBA, became a completely different animal back in the state where he'd played college ball. Nothing like home, right? From his first games in gold, he displayed newfound confidence, clutch shooting, and an electric energy that caught the league off guard. He jumped to a career-high 23 points a game, made his first All-Star appearance, earned the NBA's Most Improved Player award, and even secured All-NBA selections. All in one breakout season that sounds extremely familiar. Once again, Pacers management had seamlessly found a way to retool in a timely manner. Meanwhile, Sabonis blossomed quietly but powerfully alongside him. Originally just a footnote of the deal, he developed into a versatile, skilled big, thriving as a high IQ passer and dominant rebounder. Together, this unexpected duo breathed fresh life into the Pacers franchise. They clocked in at 48 wins, a 6-game improvement over season from trading their franchise cornerstone. Their reward? A first-round date with LeBron James and the 2018 Cavaliers. LeBron had never lost a first-round playoff series, and although it was clearly his worst roster in a decade, it seemed like another straightforward task for him. The Pacers were ready to shatter expectations again. It became apparent early on this would be no cakewalk. Oladipo proved the regular season was no fluke, relentlessly attacking the rim and hitting timely shots. Sabonis displayed maturity beyond his years, providing critical minutes off the bench. They even took Game 1 in Cleveland by 18 points, stunning everyone. Even more stunning was LeBron's absolute refusal to go down in this manner.
Left, Cleveland triggers in. James, 2 seconds, 1 second to the win. Oh! LeBron James delivers.
Doorstep anybody? They were right there. Winning Game 5 and heading back home would have given them the chance to pack a reeling Cleveland roster up in 6th, whilst dethroning the streak of 7 straight finals all in one move. The Pacers managed to push the series all the way to a decisive Game 7, and it genuinely felt like the legendary streak may end. In classic Pacers fashion though, doorstep. The run was over, but the message was clear. This Pacer team was serious a good bit before they were actually supposed to be. On the heels of a heartbreaking era, they did have something to work with. Expectations skyrocketed entering the 2019 season, and they again looked poised for a strong playoff run. They were steady, consistent, and well on track for another 50-win campaign until January 23rd, 2019, when everything once again changed in a flash. In a mid-season matchup against Toronto, Oladipo chased down a fast break and collapsed to the floor, suffering a ruptured quad tendon, one of the toughest injuries an athlete can face. Instantly, Indiana's hopes deflated just like they had during every memorable era up to this point. The heart and soul of the Pacers was sidelined indefinitely at age 26 with very little hope to reach the potential he'd shown. Once again, how cruel. Reggie losing to nearly every eventual winner and watching the house he built give out from the bottom. Granger picking up the baton and quickly losing his ability in the process. Paul George's era getting exactly 2 real shots at it during the Heatles era. And now even the unexpected, humble rebuild falling victim to a situation that felt all too familiar. Was it just not meant to be? Sabonis did his best to steady the ship, ascending to all-star status himself by 2020, and alongside players like Miles Turner and Malcolm Brogdon, kept the Pacers respectable. Obviously though, without Oladipo's dynamic play, their ceiling plummeted. They made the playoffs in 2019, but suffered an easy sweep at the hands of Boston. Oladipo returned nearly a year later, yet the spark had dimmed. Rumors surfaced about his uncertain future in Indiana, team chemistry wavered, and the magic of the previous season seemed permanently lost. If it was any consolation, they were one of the biggest stories of the bubble when TJ Warren began a long line of players sharply overperforming their normal abilities with no crowd around. Bubble Warren was a fun phenomenon, and one of the most memorable moments in 2020's NBA lore. When they limped out of the Orlando bubble, their future prospects seemed little better than the outside world they were returning to. It was clear a once promising era had ended prematurely. Another core, another brief glimpse at greatness, ended by cruel luck and circumstance. Yet in classic Indiana fashion, after arriving at the doorstep just to see it closed, another unexpected one was about to open. As you probably see by now, this franchise has always had a knack for bouncing back regardless of the circumstances. In February 2022, after just one losing season with no playoffs, the front office made a surprising move, trading Domantas Sabonis, the versatile big man who developed into an all-star cornerstone, to Sacramento. In return, the Pacers received Tyrese Haliburton, a talented young guard seemingly poised to become a star. It was an eye-opening deal. The Kings had a logjam in their backcourt, needing to decide between Haliburton and De'Aaron Fox. They chose Fox, inadvertently gifting Indy a new cornerstone. To be honest, if anything, the Pacers' bounce-back speed may just show how locked in they are to the league they work in. Not every front office exhibits the same skill and care, but if you were actually watching Kings basketball during Hallie's earliest games, you saw it. When Fox would sit, or otherwise be subbed out, you got to see the floor general at work. IQ, skill, shooting from a jumper many said wouldn't translate in the league. Really, if you were watching, you were seeing the seeds of a talent currently baffling an NBA fandom. His arrival signaled a new direction, young, dynamic, and built for modern basketball. He quickly proved his worth, showcasing elite court vision, scoring efficiency, and leadership well beyond his years. Indiana's rebuild had a cornerstone almost overnight, as Haliburton immediately clicked alongside sometime sharpshooter Buddy Hield, another valuable piece acquired in the trade. Still, in his early days there, you could see there was a ladder to climb. As Fox would often handle the ball in sack, Hadley would sometimes still be off to the side as Brogdon initiated the offense. It was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, the Pacers drafted Benedict Mathurin in 2022, an explosive scorer with a fierce competitive edge. Coupled with Miles Turner, who despite constant trade rumors remained a consistent defensive anchor, the Pacers quietly built an exciting young core. By the time the deal happened, however, it was far too late for a playoff appearance. And despite a 20-10 average producing Reese's first All-Star appearance the next season, he only appeared in 56 games due to injury, again thwarting any postseason action. By the 2024 season, however, their potential finally began to translate into real results. Despite low external expectations initially, the Pacers surged forward, propelled by another leap from Haliburton, producing an All-NBA appearance this time and another midseason trade. Before the playoffs, management pulled off another significant move, acquiring Pascal Siakam from Toronto. By name and credential, this was in fact a versatile, championship-tested forward. His arrival also added veteran leadership, scoring versatility, and defensive prowess to an already promising young squad, signaling Indiana's intention to compete immediately. Smart thing too. The tale of a young talent being wasted was simply all too familiar. The Pacers intended to capitalize on what was quickly becoming the best floor general in the league. Now with the recognizable core duo, the roster was also fitted by complementary pieces such as Aaron Nesmith, who'd been brought in from Boston when they decided it was time to free up the ball by getting off Brogdon. And this trade also included a pick to eventually select Ben Shepherd. For the extremely cheap price of 2 future seconds, and I mean future, they nabbed originally 8th overall pick Obi Toppin, who simply wasn't fitting in at Madison Square. McConnell had already been sitting on the roster since summer 2019, meanwhile Andrew Nembhard was spotted at pick 31 in the second round of 2022. Quietly, the front office had built a young, gritty, and versatile roster that had the unique ability to fly under the radar while still being really damn good. Entering the playoffs as a 47-win 6th seed, they were viewed as good but not great. With a subpar 23-18 record post-trade and an absolute juggernaut in Boston, there really just was no reason to pay it all serious mind yet. Then they partially stunned the NBA world with a deep run. And I say partially because of the multiple injuries which aided it. Looking back though, you realize there was actually something there. And it was just easy to write off in the wake of them being an unexpected conference finals participant in the first place. Yet they embraced the skepticism. Haliburton, with his calm leadership and clutch performances, made it clear it wasn't a temporary surge. The team rallied around the notion they were overlooked and underestimated. Though the run ultimately fell short given they were likely never going to get through Boston, coupled with the fact Haliburton picked up an injury of his own, the Pacers had once again done what they'd always done best. Bounced back with resilience and shrewd roster management, setting the stage for sustained success rather than fleeting achievement. Also, the Boston series did serve as the first hint of what we would see now a year later, as despite being swept, 3 of the 4 games ended within 5 points, 2 of those being 3-point losses. 3 Pacer players shot better than 40% from 3 on significant attempts, while 6 players averaged double digits. Again, even with Hallie healthy, it was Boston's year. Still, the performance was undeniable enough for even Jaylen Brown to acknowledge how insane it all was.
And then they were shooting the ball well. Some of those guys turned into fucking Michael Jordan or whatever. And we was like, man, what is going on? Like, we couldn't figure it out. But in the fourth quarter, we just stayed close enough. We would just stay right there.
With expectations not having changed much despite the signs, Indy's slow start to the 25 season highlighted what the masses thought in the first place. Hallie was, at this point, receiving career-long criticism of being overrated, bagless, and whatever else NBA Twitter could come up with to discredit the resume up to now. Sure, he was a good point guard. Could he actually be the driving force behind a great team? There were so many guys out there who were visually more impressive. Perhaps the biggest example of the doubts came in December 2022, when Wally Szczerbiak called him, on live TV mind you, a fake wannabe all-star. New York bias aside, it was a ridiculous thing to say as a former player. A year later, Reese dished out a 22-point, 23-assist performance to erase all doubt in the middle of his now second all-star appearance. The entire situation was a microcosm of the perception of Haliburton. For instance, barely 2 months ago, he was voted by his peers as the most overrated player in the league. His peers. Not Stephen A. Smith, who plays solitaire during the finals, then proceeds to stick to topics he actually knows how to push. Well, the timing was impeccable, I guess.
With 37, Giannis with 37, and tonight they've combined for 63. Gary showed up. The steal. 4-point game. There's still life in the building. Haliburton attacking, and the foul. Porter to Green, Trent with it, and he loses it. On a brilliant night, Gary Trent Jr. has it roll off of his fingertips. Wow, I am in shock. Here we go. Haliburton, 5 seconds, 4 seconds. Haliburton for the lead. 1.3 to go. Pacers by 1. Porter to inbound it, no. Giannis is going to take it now. Here's Gary Trent Jr. Lets it fly. And the Pacers are moving on.
There was nothing too crazy about finishing off the injured and, at that point, dying Milwaukee squad. Still, now knowing how the rest of it went, it was a very eerie moment of foreshadowing.
Your guys have got to do a much better job of getting open.
Misses Haliburton the rebound. 9 seconds. They do have a timeout. Carlisle's going to let him play. Haliburton steps back and hits. Tyrese Haliburton trying to take Cleveland's heart. It's over. The Indiana Pacers in a Game 2 stunner.
At this point, it was starting to get somewhat believable. They were supposed to beat the Bucks. Cleveland, however, had spent the entire year being compared to Boston, as Indy had been little more than an afterthought on the heels of a rough start due to injury. Sure, they totally turned it around in the current calendar year, yet almost nobody could have predicted the magic now unfolding. Of course, the Cavs were dealing with injuries of their own, an excuse which faltered once they reached Game 4 with the chance to tie the series. Getting absolutely flooded to go down 3-1, it was becoming clear the Indiana Pacers were headed back to a second straight conference finals, both of which totally blindsided fans. This is where things got real.
New York is 11 of 29 shooting threes, about 38%. Haliburton, his three is good. Haliburton with 27 the other way with a screen from Shepherd. He'll roll and he'll find the defensive heart. Neesmith three, good, got it. That makes it an 8-point game with 2 minutes to go.
And I'm surprised they don't have Miles Turner, the rim protector, on the floor as well.
Neesmith three, good, another one from outside. Neesmith again, three, got it! He's a flamethrower! Controversy there was. Neesmith, it's a three, it's a 2-point game! It's a 2-point game with 22 seconds to go. 2-point game, Indiana with it. Haliburton, he'll take it, he'll backpedal a three for the win, and...
Okay, the choke emote. Yeah, if you were getting tired of Pacer Devil Magic jokes, this is definitely where it started. Just over 30 years since Reggie gave us one of the most iconic moments in sports history, Hallie followed it up against none other than New York in the Garden in the Eastern Conference Finals. It's easily one of the coolest full circle moments you'll ever see. Meanwhile, it was now the third instance we could document of unprecedented comebacks and clutch shooting in the last month or so. What was going on? This time, there were a grand total of 0 injuries to blame. No competition jabs, no rewriting the moment. Tyrese Haliburton and the Pacers were in the midst of authoring a run that could rival or even surpass the 2011 Mavericks, toppling the Cavs, who at times played at a 70-win pace, playing New York, who'd made their move specifically to compete with the defending champion Celtics. It was storybook, but at some point, reality did have to set in, right?
There's about a 9-second difference, shot clock and game clock. Gilgeous-Alexander spins, pulls up, jumper. Off the mark, won't go. Rebound, Neesmith. The Pacers with a chance to win it. Final seconds, no fouls to give. Haliburton looking. Haliburton driving, pulls up, jump shot. It's good! It's good! With 0.3 of a second remaining. Timeout, OKC. Tyrese Haliburton does it again!
Down 7 points with 40 seconds remaining against the 2021 champs. Down a very similar margin against what at that point might have been the Eastern Conference favorite, New York had a 99.7% win probability, only to get a chilling reminder of the past on the way to once again falling short. It should have stopped in OKC though. It had to. The Thunder were the heavy favorites entering the series, and the game appeared to be following the script all the way through, until it reached the pacer test portion of the script. At this point, Haliburton was reaching legendary status level of clutch shooting. He was now 13 of 15 on game-tying or go-ahead shots in the final 2 minutes of the season and playoffs. It very much appeared you could beat Indiana for 46 minutes, and if you weren't up 20 or more at the end, you weren't safe. Immediately, the 2025 NBA Finals turned into more of a chess match than the easy pickings media had made it out to be. By Game 4, the Pacers had taken a 2-1 lead, once again coming up to the doorstep of greatness. They led Game 4 for 35 minutes and 7 seconds. They were beginning to move with the confidence that they were just a better team at this point. OKC had a near-perfect season, yet had already shown cracks when tested by an injured Nugget squad. The specialty of Indiana wasn't just Tyrese. It was the 7 or 8 guys after him that all had something they could provide. Every time TJ McConnell's feet touched the paint, results. Need a couple of threes or a play from Obi Toppin? Results. Need to let Hallie rest a bit while not actually taking him out of the game? Here's Andrew Nembhard with results. Honestly, they were the first team I'd ever seen of their kind. It wasn't a superstar trio, hell, it wasn't even a superstar duo. You'll recall the Pascal Siakam trade, and nobody was reacting as if they just formed some all-time pairing. They were so deep and well-rounded, in fact, they were in perfect position to withstand the incoming hits. OKC drew from their battle experience in previous rounds to prevail on the road in a do-or-die game, which I suspect will now haunt Indy for years to come. If they could have just held on, at that point, flat-out dominant unit would have had 3 chances to close out the favorites. Chances they sorely needed. Because in the most untimely fashion possible, Hallie was now dealing with calf issues. We'd seen this already. Franchise needs its most important player to power through a risky injury at a crucial point in the season. Result? We'd seen the result. Though his playstyle was a lot less invasive and shifty, Hallie could affect the game without creating highlights or really popping off your screen. Fair, but I immediately documented in Game 5 when I didn't think he should still be playing. I understood it, but the initial reaction to aggravating his injury just looked way too familiar. I mean, could you even avoid the oncoming injury playing on a strain? Didn't matter. They'd unexpectedly come all this way to finish a job which began a quarter of a century ago. Finishing this job would have been one of the most incredible feats in sports history. And so, when they won Game 6 and he'd shown up to play after being questionable, there was zero question of if Zero would be there the second time around.
Little fake, kicks it back out. Siakam, Haliburton lines up a long three-pointer. Got it! Haliburton launches another one. Puts it in. Back-to-back threes for Tyrese Haliburton. The aggressive looking for a shot. Another three-point attempt. That one short. Williams tips it, but Panther right there to pick it up. Haliburton tries again. Haliburton hits again. His third three-pointer already. And a timeout. Mark Daigneault. He's upset with the officials. Probably upset with Haliburton as well. What a start for Tyrese Haliburton.
That gets them a second shot, and Tyrese, 2 for $1, knocks it down.
Nembhard kicks it out. Toppin. Good contest from Dort. Haliburton falls down. He looks hurt. Here comes SGA the other way. Inside, and Williams throws it down. Haliburton's hurt right away when he fell. Of course, that strained calf, knees in pain, so emotional.
It's easily the most difficult moment I've watched live as an NBA fan. The moment the camera panned to his face, I knew what had happened. The blazing start caused me to temporarily forget I'd been rightfully worried about this just days ago. Cruelty, man. What was set to be the greatest run ever disappeared at a moment's notice as an emerging superstar sustained an injury that used to threaten careers before he'd even reached his prime. Heartbreaking, yet, as mentioned before, not a death sentence. Anyone who had actually watched the Pacers over the recent months already knew they were a lot more than just 1 or 2 players. These guys fought hard, clinging to a lead at the half. Almost immediately, however, the expected part of the script kicked in finally. Though Dort's 3 didn't initially open the floodgates, it felt pretty obvious what was next. They broke it open, and without Reese even on the floor to contribute, their last-ditch effort fell short as the Thunder finally prevailed. To be honest, I've watched the NBA for decades. Different teams, players, eras. I can honestly say I've never seen anything like it. Not just the magical run, which could be an entire separate video. I've never seen anything like their misfortune. Think about everything you've heard in this video. Reggie's constant shortcomings, only to be completely shattered right before retirement. Danny Granger barely getting any time at all to make his mark. Drafting his replacement in Kawhi for the Spurs instead of having him next to George. PG only getting a couple seasons before sustaining a gruesome injury. Hitting on his trade, which almost never happens when dealing a star, only to watch the other star immediately lose his shine. Then once again doing the work to find a new cornerstone to watch him perform the magic they thought he could, right before sustaining possibly the worst injury a player can have. The story of the Pacers is one of resilience. Heartbreak, turmoil, short-term success, which only ever seemed to exist to be knocked down to the ground as quickly as they rose. 25 years after their only other NBA Finals appearance, we can say exactly what we said about them after going down 3-1 to Los Angeles. They were at the doorstep, but just like every single other time, nobody was home.